The rain fell like judgment from a blackened sky, hammering the Yorkshire moors with a fury that turned the road into rivers of mud and the night into something alive with violence. Hadrian Vane, Duke of Ashworth, pressed his horse forward through the tempest, cursing himself for refusing the inn's offer of shelter 3 miles back. Pride had kept him riding. Pride and the restless hunger that had driven him for 8 years now. The need to keep moving, keep working, keep destroying until the debt was paid in full. Lightning split the darkness, illuminating the road ahead in stark white brilliance. In that flash, he saw her, a figure crumpled at the edge of the road, half submerged in a ditch where rainwater rushed toward some unseen destination. Dark hair plastered to pale skin, a traveling dress, once fine, now ruined with mud. One arm stretched out as if she'd been crawling toward something before her strength gave out. Hadrian pulled his horse to a violent stop, nearly unseating himself in the process. For one terrible moment, he thought she was dead. Then another flash of lightning revealed the shallow rise and fall of her chest. He was off his horse before conscious thought caught up with him, boots sinking into the mire as he reached her. She was lighter than he expected when he gathered her into his arms, her body cold and trembling against his chest. Her head lolled against his shoulder, and he caught the scent of rain and roses, and something else beneath it, something that made his chest tighten with an emotion he refused to name. "Hold on," he muttered, though she likely couldn't hear him over the storm's roar. "Just hold on." Ashworth Manor was still 2 miles distant, but Hadrian had never ridden faster in his life. He cradled the unconscious woman against him with one arm, controlling his horse with the other, and raced through the darkness like the devil himself was giving chase. The manor emerged from the storm like a fortress, its windows glowing with warm light that seemed to promise safety. Hadrian barely waited for his horse to stop before he was dismounting, shouting for servants, carrying the woman through the grand entrance hall, leaving a trail of rainwater across marble floors that had been in his family for 6 generations. "Your Grace," Mrs. Lockwood appeared from the servants' corridor, her face cycling through shock, concern, and professional composure in the span of seconds. "What on earth?" "Found her on the road. She's half frozen. I need the blue guest chamber prepared immediately. Hot water, blankets, and send for Dr. Whitmore." "At once, Your Grace." Hadrian took the stairs 2 at a time, the woman still limp in his arms. She'd stirred briefly during the ride, her eyes fluttering open to reveal irises the color of a winter sea, pale green touched with gray. She'd looked at him without recognition, without fear, with something that might have been gratitude before unconsciousness claimed her again. He shouldn't care. He'd built his life on not caring, on cold calculation and colder revenge. He'd learned the cost of trust, of softness, of letting people close enough to destroy you. But something about the way she'd reached for him in that brief moment of awareness had cracked something he thought he'd sealed away years ago. The blue guest chamber was ready by the time he reached it, a fire already blazing in the hearth, a maid turning down the bed with efficient hands. Hadrian laid the woman down with more gentleness than he'd shown anyone in recent memory, stepping back only when Mrs. Lockwood arrived with warm towels and a determined expression. "We'll take care of her, Your Grace. You should change out of those wet clothes before you catch your death." Hadrian nodded, but he didn't move. He stood in the doorway, watching as the maids worked to warm the stranger, and tried to understand why his heart was pounding so hard against his ribs. She was beautiful. He could see that even through the mud and the pallor of near death. High cheekbones, a stubborn chin, lips that looked like they were made for smiling, even though they were currently blue with cold. Late 20s, perhaps. Gently bred, judging by the quality of her ruined dress and the softness of her hands. But there was something else. Something that nagged at the edges of his memory like a half-forgotten dream. "Was there anyone else?" Mrs. Lockwood asked, interrupting his thoughts. "A carriage? A companion?" "No. She was alone." "Traveling alone in this weather?" The housekeeper's tone conveyed what she thought of such foolishness. She must have been desperate. Desperate. Yes, that was the word. Hadrian had seen desperation before. He'd caused it often enough in recent years, hunting down every member of the family that had destroyed his father, stripping them of money, reputation, hope. It was what they deserved. What justice demanded. But looking at this woman, fragile and fighting for warmth in his guest bed, he felt something he hadn't experienced in a very long time. Doubt. "Send word when she wakes," he said finally. "I want to know who she is." He turned and walked away before Mrs. Lockwood could respond, retreating to his own chambers to change out of his soaked clothing and pour himself a whiskey that did nothing to quiet the strange churning in his gut. The storm continued to rage outside his window, but inside Hadrian's mind, a different kind of tempest was building. He'd spent 8 years feeding his hatred, nurturing it, letting it grow into something that consumed everything else in his life. His sister Cressida said he'd become a ghost, going through the motions of living without actually being alive. His grandmother worried he'd never marry, never produce an heir, never allow himself any happiness. His enemies whispered that the Duke of Ashworth had no heart at all. They were wrong. He had a heart. He'd simply locked it away where no one could touch it, where no one could use it against him. And yet, something about the woman in the blue chamber made that lock feel suddenly, terrifyingly fragile. He drained his whiskey and poured another, staring into the fire until the flames blurred and danced before his eyes. Who was she? Where had she come from? And why did some instinct deep in his bones insist that finding her had changed everything? The answer would come soon enough, and when it did, it would burn his carefully constructed world to ash. Verity Lydgate woke to warmth and confusion and the distant memory of drowning. For a long moment, she simply lay still, trying to piece together where she was and how she'd gotten there. The last thing she remembered was the storm, the road washing away beneath her feet after the carriage accident, the coachman's body lying broken against a tree, walking until she couldn't walk anymore, falling. Someone had found her. Someone had carried her through the rain. She remembered arms like iron bands, a chest like a wall, a voice telling her to hold on. She opened her eyes. The room that greeted her was beautiful, all pale blue silk and dark wood furniture, and a fire crackling merrily in a marble hearth. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, suggesting the storm had passed, and a new day had dawned. A new day in a stranger's house, in a stranger's bed, wearing a nightgown that wasn't hers. Verity sat up slowly, ignoring the pounding in her head and the ache in every muscle. She needed to understand her situation. She needed to find out where she was. A young maid dozing in a chair by the fire jerked awake at the sound of movement. Her eyes went wide, and she scrambled to her feet with a curtsy. "Oh, miss, you're awake. Mrs. Lockwood said to fetch her the moment you stirred. Please, stay in bed. I'll be right back." She fled before Verity could ask any questions, leaving her alone with her confusion and a growing sense of unease. The room offered few clues about her host. No family portraits, no personal items, nothing to identify the house or its owner. Just elegant, impersonal luxury that spoke of old money and older pride. Verity pushed back the covers and swung her legs over the side of the bed, testing her strength. Her limbs felt weak but functional. Nothing broken, nothing permanently damaged. She'd survived. The question was, survived into what? The door opened, and a severe-looking woman in black entered with the kind of quiet authority that marked a senior servant. Housekeeper, Verity guessed. Her eyes were sharp, assessing, not unkind, but certainly not warm. "Good morning, miss. I'm Mrs. Lockwood. How are you feeling?" "Confused," Verity admitted. "Where am I?" "Ashworth Manor, miss. His Grace the Duke of Ashworth found you on the road last night and brought you here." The world stopped. Ashworth. Duke of Ashworth. Hadrian Vane. The man who had spent the last 8 years systematically destroying her family. The man who had ruined her brother's business ventures, blocked every opportunity her father sought, spread whispers that closed doors before they could even knock. The man whose relentless campaign of revenge had driven her mother to an early grave and reduced their once proud family to genteel poverty and desperate scheming. The man Verity had vowed to confront if she ever got the chance. The man she'd imagined facing 1,000 times, demanding answers, demanding justice, demanding he see the human cost of his cold vendetta. And now she was lying in his guest bed, wearing his nightgown, entirely at his mercy. "Miss?" Mrs. Lockwood's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. "Are you quite well? You've gone very pale." Verity forced herself to breathe. Think. She couldn't panic. She couldn't reveal who she was, not until she understood the situation better. "I'm sorry," she managed. "I'm simply overwhelmed. Did you say Duke?" "His Grace, Hadrian Vane, Duke of Ashworth." Mrs. Lockwood said it with obvious pride. "You're very fortunate he found you when he did. The doctor said another hour in that cold, and you might not have survived." Fortunate. Verity nearly laughed at the bitter irony. She'd been saved by the man who had ruined her life, the man who would throw her out into the street the moment he learned her name, or worse. "I should thank him," she said carefully. Is his Grace available? He's asked to be informed when you woke. But first, perhaps some breakfast? You must be famished." Verity nodded automatically, her mind racing. She had minutes, maybe less, before she'd have to face him, before she'd have to decide whether to reveal her identity or hide it. If she told him the truth, he'd almost certainly cast her out. She had no money, no transportation, no way to reach London and the distant cousin who represented her last hope. She'd be stranded in the Yorkshire countryside with nothing but the clothes on her back, and those were ruined. But if she lied, if she gave a false name and concealed her connection to the family he hated, she might buy herself time. Time to recover. Time to find a way forward. Time, perhaps, to understand the man behind the monster and find some way to end the destruction he'd wrought. It was dangerous. It was foolish. If he discovered her deception, his wrath would be terrible. But what choice did she have? The door opened again, and Mrs. Lockwood stepped aside with a murmured, "Your Grace." He entered like a storm made flesh, tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair swept back from a face that seemed carved from granite. Eyes the color of a winter sky, pale and piercing, fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. He moved with the unconscious authority of a man who had never been denied anything in his life, and the air in the room seemed to change when he entered, becoming charged with something electric and dangerous. This was the man who had carried her through the storm. This was the man who had destroyed her family. This was the man she had to deceive if she wanted to survive. "You're awake." His voice was deep, rough, and unexpectedly warm. "How are you feeling?" Verity forced herself to meet his eyes. "Better, thanks to your kindness, your grace. I owe you my life." Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, or discomfort. Anyone would have done the same. "What's your name?" "We found no identification, no luggage." The moment of truth. Verity's heart pounded against her ribs, but she kept her voice steady. "Verity Marsden," she said, using her mother's maiden name. "I was traveling to London when the storm caught us. The carriage overturned. The coachman—" She didn't have to fake the tremor in her voice. "I was the only survivor." His expression softened almost imperceptibly. "I'm sorry. That must have been terrifying." It was. She looked down at her hands, playing the role of the traumatized survivor, because it wasn't entirely a role. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't found me." "You would have died." The blunt words hung between them. When Verity looked up, Hadrian Vane was watching her with those pale, piercing eyes, and she had the sudden, terrifying sensation that he could see straight through her lies to the truth beneath. But he only nodded once, stepped back toward the door. "Rest today. We'll discuss your situation when you've recovered your strength. Mrs. Lockwood will see to anything you need." He was gone before she could respond, leaving Verity alone with her racing heart and the knowledge that she'd just made a deal with the devil. She only hoped she could survive long enough to collect on it. 3 days passed in a strange sort of limbo. Verity recovered her strength slowly, spending her hours in the beautiful blue chamber or taking careful walks through the manor's endless corridors. The servants were kind, but distant, treating her with the polite wariness reserved for guests whose status was unclear. Mrs. Lockwood checked on her regularly, ensuring she had everything she needed while revealing nothing about the household's inner workings. And Hadrian Vane remained a ghost. She caught glimpses of him occasionally, a tall figure disappearing around a corner, a shadow passing a window in the east wing where she'd been told his study was located. Once she heard his voice in the entrance hall, giving instructions to a servant with clipped efficiency, but he made no effort to see her, sent no invitations to dine, offered no further conversation. It should have been a relief. Instead, it felt like waiting for an executioner who kept postponing the appointment. On the 4th morning, the summons finally came. "His Grace requests your presence in the library," Mrs. Lockwood announced, her expression giving nothing away. "If you're feeling well enough." Verity wasn't, but she nodded anyway. Better to face this now than spend another day drowning in anticipation. The library was magnificent, a 2-story cathedral of books with a gallery running around the upper level and tall windows that flooded the space with morning light. Hadrian stood before the fireplace, one hand resting on the mantel, his face half-shadowed despite the brightness. "Miss Marsden, please, sit." She chose a chair near the window, putting distance between them, giving herself light to read his expression while keeping her own face harder to decipher. A small advantage, but in this game, she'd take whatever she could get. "You wanted to see me, Your Grace." "I've made inquiries." He turned to face her fully, and something in his expression made her stomach drop. "About the carriage accident. About you. Verity's heart stopped. He knows. He knows everything. "The local magistrate confirmed a carriage overturned on the North Road during the storm," Hadrian continued. "1 casualty, the driver. 1 passenger, a woman traveling alone. But the carriage was registered to a Mrs. Catherine Holloway of London." His eyes narrowed. "Not a Miss Marsden of anywhere." Relief and terror warred in Verity's chest. He'd found the discrepancy, but he hadn't found the truth. Not yet. "Mrs. Holloway is my cousin," she said, the lie flowing more easily than she'd expected. "A widow. She lent me her carriage for the journey north. I was visiting family." "What family?" "The Ashbournes of Whitby, distant relations on my mother's side." She'd prepared this story over the past 3 days, constructing a web of half-truths that would be difficult to verify. The Ashbournes were real, a minor family she'd read about in an old society paper. They were unlikely to have any connection to the Lydgates, or any reason to know her true identity. Hadrian studied her for a long moment, and Verity forced herself to hold his gaze without flinching. "You're lying about something," he said finally. "I'm not certain what, but you're lying." "Your Grace, I assure you, don't." He held up a hand. "I've built my fortune on reading people, Miss Marsden, on knowing when they're hiding something. You're hiding something. The question is whether it matters." Verity's breath caught. "And does it matter?" He moved away from the fireplace, crossing to the window where the light fell full on his face. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the slight hollowing of his cheeks that spoke of sleepless nights and relentless pressure. He was perhaps 32 or 33, young for a duke, but something in his expression seemed far older. "I've been trying to decide," he said slowly, "what to do with you. I'm not your responsibility. If you'd simply lend me enough for coach fare to London, I'll trouble you no further." "And arrive in London with nothing? No clothes, no references, no protection?" He shook his head. "Whatever you're running from, whatever you're hiding, sending you off alone would be tantamount to destroying you." The irony of his words cut like a blade. He had destroyed her, systematically and thoroughly, and he didn't even know it. "Then what do you propose?" Hadrian was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful, measured, as if he was working out the words as he said them. "My sister Cressida arrives tomorrow. She's been in Bath for the season, but she's returning for a house party we're hosting next week. Several influential families, business connections, potential alliances." He paused. "She needs a companion." Verity blinked. A companion? Someone to keep her company, accompany her to events, provide a buffer against the fortune hunters who inevitably swarm whenever she appears in society. His jaw tightened. "I've tried hiring professionals, but they either bore her to tears or quit within a month. She's, shall we say, spirited. And you think I would be different? I think you're clever, desperate, and have nowhere else to go. That combination tends to produce results." It was not a flattering assessment, but it wasn't wrong either. Verity considered the offer, turning it over in her mind like a strange jewel. Stay at Ashworth Manor. Live under the same roof as the man who had ruined her family. Watch him, learn his weaknesses, and understand what drove his relentless vendetta. Perhaps find some way to end it, to salvage what remained of the Lydgate name. Or perhaps lose herself entirely to a deception that grew more dangerous by the day. "What would this arrangement entail?" she asked carefully. "Room and board, a modest salary, access to the family's social calendar. You'd be treated as a guest rather than a servant, a friend of Cressida's rather than an employee. The distinction matters in society. And what do you get in return?" His eyes met hers, and for a moment, she glimpsed something unexpected in their pale depths, something that looked almost like loneliness. "Peace," he said. "My sister has been begging me to find her someone interesting for months. If you can keep her entertained through the house party, without causing a scandal or encouraging unsuitable suitors, I'll consider it a bargain well made." It was reasonable. It was logical. It was absolutely insane. "I have conditions," Verity heard herself say. His eyebrow rose. "You're negotiating with me? You said yourself I have nowhere else to go. That means I need this arrangement to work, and for it to work, I need certain assurances." The ghost of a smile crossed his features. "Very well. Name them." "First, I want your word that you'll make no further inquiries into my background. Whatever I'm hiding, as you put it, stays hidden." That's a dangerous promise to demand from someone who just admitted you're lying to them. Nevertheless, he considered, then nodded slowly. "Agreed. What else?" "Second, I want a letter of reference when this ends. A real one, something that will help me secure a position elsewhere. I won't leave Ashworth Manor worse off than I arrived." "Also agreed. And third?" Verity hesitated. This was the dangerous one, the one that might reveal too much. "I want to know why you saved me." The question seemed to catch him off guard. "What?" "On the road, in the storm. You didn't have to stop. You didn't have to carry me 2 miles through a tempest and summon a doctor and install me in your finest guest chamber. Why did you?" Silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken things. Hadrian turned back to the window, his profile sharp against the light. "I don't know," he said finally. I've been asking myself the same question for 4 days. It wasn't an answer, but somehow it felt like the most honest thing he'd said. Do we have an agreement? Verity asked. He turned, crossing the distance between them until he stood close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. Close enough that she could smell cedar and wood smoke and something darker beneath. Something that made her pulse quicken despite everything. We have an agreement, Miss Marsden. Welcome to Ashworth Manor. He extended his hand. Verity looked at it for a moment. This hand that had carried her through the storm. This hand that had signed the documents destroying her family's fortune. This hand that she was now going to shake in partnership. She took it. His grip was warm and firm, and something passed between them at the contact, something electric and terrifying and entirely unexpected. Verity saw his eyes widen slightly, felt his fingers tighten around hers before he released her and stepped back. Cressida arrives tomorrow afternoon, he said, his voice carefully neutral. I'll have Mrs. Lockwood provide you with appropriate clothing. Try to make a good impression. He left without waiting for her response, and Verity sank back into her chair, her hand still tingling where he'd touched it. What had she done? She'd agreed to live in the home of her enemy, to befriend his sister, to weave herself into the fabric of his life while hiding the truth that could destroy everything. She'd agreed to dance with the devil and hope she could keep up. Somewhere outside, a crow called, harsh and mocking. Verity stared at the library's endless shelves of books and wondered if any of them contained instructions for surviving the mess she'd just created. She doubted it, but it was too late to turn back now. The game had begun, and she would play it to the end, whatever that end might be. She only hoped she'd still recognize herself when it was over. Cressida Vane arrived like a summer storm, all golden curls and bright laughter, and energy that seemed to fill every corner of Ashworth Manor the moment she swept through the door. Verity watched from the gallery above the entrance hall as the young woman embraced her brother with enthusiastic abandon, talking at a speed that made following her words nearly impossible. She was perhaps 20 years old, with the same strong bone structure as Hadrian, but softened into something approaching beauty. Have you been sleeping at all? Eating? Have you been sleeping at all? Eating? Doing anything besides brooding in your study and terrifying the servants? I don't terrify the servants. Mrs. Lockwood says you made a footman cry last week. He dropped an entire tea service. Hadrian! Cressida's voice carried a warning that seemed incongruous with her cheerful demeanor. We discussed this. You can't keep punishing the world for things that aren't their fault. A shadow passed across his features, too quick to identify. Did you have a pleasant journey? The subject change was obvious, but Cressida allowed it, launching into an animated description of her time in Bath that involved at least 3 near scandals, 2 unsuitable suitors, and 1 incident with a runaway horse that Verity suspected was dramatically embellished. And speaking of companions, Cressida said, her voice suddenly carrying with theatrical projection. I understand you've found me one. Where is she? I know she's watching. I can feel eyes on me. Verity froze. How had she known? Hadrian's gaze lifted to the gallery, finding her immediately. Miss Marsden, perhaps you'd like to join us? There was nothing to do but descend, with as much dignity as she could muster. Verity kept her chin high and her pace measured, aware of Cressida's sharp assessment with every step. So you're the mysterious woman from the storm. Cressida circled her slowly, much as her brother had done in the library. Hadrian's letter was frustratingly vague. He said you were clever and desperate, are you? Cressida, Hadrian warned. What? I'm simply asking. If we're going to be companions, I should know what I'm working with. Verity met the younger woman's eyes directly. I'm clever enough to know when I'm being tested, and desperate enough to pass anyway. Is that sufficient? Silence fell. Then Cressida's face split into a delighted grin. Oh, I like her. She grabbed Verity's hands, squeezing them with impulsive warmth. I like her very much, finally. Someone who won't bore me to tears, or run away crying when I speak my mind. The standards in Bath must be quite low, Verity said dryly. Cressida laughed, a bright sound that seemed to startle even her brother. They absolutely are. Come, you must tell me everything. How did you end up half dead on the North Road? What are you running from? And most importantly, what do you think of my brother? Cressida. Hadrian's voice was sharp now. I'm going. Come along, Miss Marsden. We have so much to discuss. Verity allowed herself to be pulled toward the stairs, but she glanced back once. Hadrian stood in the entrance hall, watching them go, and his expression unreadable. Their eyes met for just a moment, and something passed between them, something that made her heart stutter in her chest. Then Cressida tugged her around the corner, and he was gone. The next several hours were a whirlwind of conversation, clothing, and confidences. Cressida's chambers were a riot of color and personality. Scarves draped over furniture, books stacked on every surface, half-finished embroidery projects abandoned in corners. She talked constantly, jumping from topic to topic with dizzying speed. But beneath the chatter, Verity sensed a sharp intelligence taking her measure. The house party begins in 3 days, Cressida explained, pulling gowns from her wardrobe with abandon. 20 guests, all carefully selected by Hadrian's man of business for maximum strategic value. Lords with parliamentary influence, merchants with useful connections, and daughters of families he wants to ally with. She wrinkled her nose. It's all terribly calculated. And your role in these calculations? Bait, mostly. Cressida's tone was matter-of-fact. I'm young, reasonably pretty, and the sister of a wealthy duke. Every fortune hunter in England would love to marry me and get access to Hadrian's influence. My job is to smile and dance, and let them think they have a chance, while Hadrian uses their distraction to negotiate business deals in the background. The cynicism of it made Verity's stomach turn. That sounds exhausting. It is. That's why I need a companion who can help me navigate the tedium without losing my mind. Cressida turned, holding up a gown of deep burgundy silk. This would look stunning on you. We're nearly the same size. I couldn't possibly. You can, and you will. Hadrian said you arrived with nothing but the clothes on your back, and those were ruined. You need a wardrobe, and I have more gowns than I could wear in 3 lifetimes. Consider it a loan if that makes your pride feel better. Verity accepted the dress, running her fingers over the fine fabric. It was finer than anything she'd owned, even before her family's fall. The Lydgates had been comfortable, not wealthy. This was wealth on a scale she'd only imagined. Why are you being so kind to me? She asked quietly. You don't know me. I could be anyone. Cressida's expression softened. Because Hadrian brought you home. In 8 years, he's never done anything without calculating the advantage first. But he carried you through a storm and put you in our best guest chamber and summoned the finest doctor in the county. And when I asked him why, he said he didn't know. She paused. My brother doesn't do things he can't explain. The fact that he saved you without understanding his own motivation tells me something important. What? That maybe, finally, he's starting to feel something again. Cressida's eyes glistened. You didn't know him before. Before our father died, before the business with the Lydgates destroyed his faith in humanity, he used to laugh. He used to trust people. He used to believe that the world could be fair if you worked hard enough. The Lydgates. Lydgates? Cressida's face darkened. They were in the same room as me, but I didn't see them. I was in the kitchen, and I was alone. I was in the kitchen, and I was alone. I was in the kitchen, and I was alone. I was in the kitchen, and I was alone. I was in the kitchen, and I was alone. I was in the kitchen, and I was alone. I was in the kitchen, and I was alone. I was in the kitchen, and I was alone. I was in the kitchen, and I was alone. I was in the kitchen, and I was alone. I was in the kitchen, and I was alone. I was in the kitchen, and I was alone. I was in the kitchen, and I was alone. I was in the kitchen, and I was alone. I was in the kitchen, and I was alone. I was in the kitchen, and I was alone. I was in the kitchen, and I was alone. I was in the kitchen, and I was alone. I was in the kitchen, and I was alone. I was in the kitchen, and I was alone. I was in the kitchen, and I was alone. I was in the kitchen, and I was alone. I was in the kitchen, and I was alone. I was in the kitchen, and I was alone. I was in the kitchen, and I was alone. I was in the kitchen, and I was alone. I was in the kitchen, and I was alone. I was in the kitchen, and I was alone. I was in the kitchen, and I was alone. I was in the kitchen, and I was alone. I was in the kitchen, and I was alone. I was in the kitchen, and I was alone. I was in the kitchen, and I was alone. I was in the kitchen, and I was alone. I was in the kitchen, and I was alone. I was in the kitchen, and I was alone. I was in the kitchen, and I was alone. I was in the kitchen, and I was alone. I was in the kitchen, and I was alone. I was in the kitchen, and I was alone. I was in the kitchen, and I was alone. I was in the kitchen, and I was alone. I was in the kitchen, and I was alone. I was in the kitchen, and I was alone. I was in the kitchen, and I was alone. I was in the kitchen, and I was alone. I was in the kitchen, and I was alone. I was in the kitchen, and I was alone. I was in the kitchen, and I was alone. I was in the kitchen, and I was alone. I was in the kitchen, and I was alone, Lydgates. Cressida's face darkened. They ruined us, nearly destroyed everything our family had built. Hadrian spent years making them pay for it. She shook her head. But that's ancient history. The point is, you make him feel something. I don't know what it is yet, but I intend to find out. Before Verity could respond, a bell rang somewhere in the depths of the house. "Dinner," Cressida announced, her bright demeanor returning like a mask slipping back into place. "Come. Time to see if you can survive a meal with the infamous Duke of Ashworth." She swept toward the door, and Verity followed, her mind reeling with what she'd just learned. The Lydgates had ruined them. That was what Hadrian believed. That was why he'd spent 8 years on his campaign of destruction. But that wasn't the truth. That wasn't the truth at all, and Verity was beginning to realize that she might be the only person alive who knew what had really happened. Dinner was a tense affair. Hadrian sat at the head of the table, carved from shadow and silence, while Cressida filled the air with chatter about Bath and fashion and the latest society gossip. Verity ate mechanically, contributing when directly addressed, but otherwise watching, learning, cataloging every detail. She was so focused on Hadrian that she almost missed the announcement. "The Dowager Duchess arrives tomorrow," Mrs. Lockwood informed them as the fish course was served. "She sent word this afternoon." Cressida's fork clattered against her plate. "Grandmother?" But she wasn't supposed to come until the house party. Apparently, she changed her mind. Hadrian's voice was flat. "She heard we have a guest." His eyes met Verity's across the table, and she saw the warning in them clearly. The Dowager had heard about her. The Dowager was coming to investigate. "Well," Cressida said with forced brightness, "this should be interesting." It was not the word Verity would have chosen. The Dowager Duchess of Ashworth arrived the following morning with the subtlety of a siege engine. Her carriage was black and imposing. Her servants moved with military precision, and she herself emerged like a general surveying conquered territory. Octavia Vane was 70 if she was a day, but age had only sharpened her. Silver hair swept up in an elaborate style, posture rigid as a sword, eyes the same pale gray as her grandson's, but infinitely colder. She wore widow's black as if it were armor, and perhaps it was. "So," she said, before anyone could offer greetings or pleasantries, "this is the stray my grandson dragged in from the storm." Verity curtsied, grateful for the years of deportment lessons her mother had insisted upon, despite their declining fortunes. "Your Grace, it's an honor to meet you." "Is it?" The dowager's gaze swept over her, missing nothing. "You have good posture. Your curtsy is adequate. Your dress is borrowed, but you wear it well. Tell me, Miss Marsden, what exactly are you?" "I'm not certain I understand the question, Your Grace. Don't play coy. You appeared from nowhere, with no luggage, no references, and no verifiable history. My grandson, who trusts no one, has installed you in our home as his sister's companion. Either you're a fortune hunter with an elaborate scheme, or you're running from something you'd rather not name." The dowager stepped closer. "Which is it?" The entrance hall fell silent. Verity could feel Hadrian watching from somewhere behind her, could sense Cressida's nervous energy. This was the test. This was where she proved herself, or failed. "Neither, Your Grace," she said quietly. "I'm simply a woman who found herself in desperate circumstances and was shown unexpected kindness. I have no designs on your grandson's fortune or your family's name. I'm here to be useful, nothing more." "Useful." The dowager's lips twitched. "And what use could you possibly be to a family like ours?" "That remains to be seen. But I've been told Lady Cressida needs a companion who won't bore her or flee at the first sign of difficulty. I can promise both." "Can you?" "We'll see about that." The dowager swept past her without another word, and Verity released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. That afternoon, the true interrogation began. The dowager summoned her to the small parlor, a room that, despite its name, was larger than the entire ground floor of Verity's family home in London. Tea was served with rigid formality, and then the older woman began her assault. She asked about Verity's education, her family, and her accomplishments. She probed for inconsistencies in the story about Mrs. Holloway's carriage and the Ashbournes of Whitby. She inquired about political opinions, religious beliefs, and thoughts on everything from the latest fashions to the proper way to address a baron's second son. Verity answered carefully, truthfully where she could, vaguely where she couldn't. She'd been educated well. That much was genuine. Her mother had ensured both her daughters could hold their own in any conversation, even as their circumstances declined. "You're not what I expected," the dowager said finally, setting down her teacup with a decisive click. "What did you expect, Your Grace? A schemer, a social climber, someone angling for a connection to the vain fortune." Her eyes narrowed. "But you're not, are you? You're something else entirely." "I'm just trying to survive, Your Grace. Nothing more complicated than that." "Survival is never simple." The dowager stood, moving to the window, with the measured grace of someone who had spent a lifetime commanding rooms. "My grandson has been surviving for 8 years now, going through the motions of living without actually being alive." "Do you know what did that to him?" Verity's heart clenched. "I've heard mention of a family called the Lydgates." "The Lydgates." The word came out like poison. "They were our partners, trusted allies. Geoffrey Lydgate and my son built a shipping empire together, or so we thought. Then Geoffrey's son made a series of catastrophic investments, lost everything, and tried to cover his failures by embezzling from the partnership. When my son discovered the theft, the stress triggered a heart attack. He died 3 days later." The room spun. Verity gripped the arm of her chair, fighting to keep her expression neutral. That wasn't true. That wasn't what happened at all. Her brother Marcus had never embezzled anything. He'd discovered that someone was stealing from the partnership, yes, but it hadn't been him. He'd tried to warn the old Duke, tried to show him the evidence pointing to someone else entirely, but before he could, the Duke had died, and Hadrian had inherited both the title and the false narrative. "I see," Verity managed. "Do you?" The Dowager turned, her gaze piercing. Hadrian has spent every moment since then making the Lydgates pay for what they did. He's ruined them financially, socially, completely. Some would say he's gone too far. I say he hasn't gone far enough. The venom in her voice was absolute. Verity understood then that this woman would never listen to the truth, would never believe that her grandson's crusade was based on lies. Her hatred was too old, too entrenched. "Why are you telling me this, Your Grace?" "Because I want you to understand what you're dealing with." The Dowager moved closer, her voice dropping to something almost like a warning. "Hadrian is not a man who forgives. He's not a man who forgets. If you are hiding something, if you are connected to his enemies in any way, he will discover it. And when he does, whatever mercy he showed you on that storm-swept road will evaporate like morning dew." Verity met her eyes without flinching. "I understand, Your Grace." "Do you?" The Dowager studied her for a long moment. "I wonder. There's something about you, Miss Marsden. Something familiar that I can't quite place. It will come to me eventually. It always does." She left Verity alone with the cold tea and the colder truth of her situation. The Dowager suspected something. She didn't know what yet, but she was looking, probing, waiting for Verity to make a mistake. And somewhere in this house was the evidence that would damn her, the proof that would reveal her as Verity Lydgate, daughter of the man Hadrian had vowed to destroy. She had to find it first. She had to find the truth about what really happened 8 years ago. And she had to do it before the Dowager's memory clicked into place and everything came crashing down. The house party preparations consumed the next 2 days in a whirlwind of activity. Verity threw herself into helping Cressida, partly to prove her usefulness, and partly to distract herself from the constant awareness of Hadrian's presence. He appeared at meals, exchanged necessary courtesies, and retreated to his study with the reliability of clockwork. But she felt his eyes on her at odd moments, caught him watching when he thought she wasn't looking. It was maddening. It was terrifying. It was something else entirely that she refused to name. On the night before the first guests were due to arrive, Verity couldn't sleep. Her mind raced with everything she'd learned, everything she still needed to discover. The Dowager's words echoed in her memory. He will discover it. And when he does, whatever mercy he showed you will evaporate. She needed answers. She needed proof. She needed to find out what had really happened 8 years ago. At midnight, she slipped from her chamber and made her way through the darkened corridors to Hadrian's study. The door was unlocked, the room empty. Moonlight spilled through tall windows, illuminating shelves of books and stacks of papers, and a massive desk that dominated the space like a throne. Verity moved quickly, rifling through drawers with trembling hands. Correspondence, account books, business documents. Nothing about the Lydgates. Nothing about the partnership or the alleged embezzlement. Then her fingers found a locked drawer. She was searching for something to pick the lock when a voice came from the shadows. "Looking for something specific, Miss Marsden?" Verity spun. Hadrian stood in the doorway, still fully dressed despite the hour, a candle in one hand, casting dancing shadows across his face. His expression was unreadable, but something dangerous lurked in those pale eyes. "I couldn't sleep," she said, the lie coming automatically. "I thought perhaps a book. In my study? In my desk? I got turned around in the dark. The library and this room are on opposite ends of the house." He entered slowly, placing the candle on a side table. "Try again." Verity's mind raced. She could maintain the lie, hope he believed her, and pray he didn't look too closely at what she'd been searching. Or she could offer a partial truth, something that might satisfy his suspicion without revealing everything. "Your grandmother told me about the Lydgates," she said. Hadrian went very still. "Did she?" "She said they destroyed your family. that your father died because of what they did." Verity kept her voice steady despite her hammering heart. "I was curious. I wanted to understand what could drive someone to spend 8 years pursuing revenge. And you thought you'd find answers in my desk? I thought I might find something that explained who you really are, beyond the title, beyond the reputation, beyond the man who saved me from a storm for reasons he still can't articulate." The honesty of it surprised even her, but something shifted behind his gaze, the dangerous edge softening into something more complex. "What my grandmother told you is true," he said slowly. "The Lydgates were our partners. Marcus Lydgate embezzled thousands of pounds, and when my father discovered it, the shock killed him. I came home from Scotland to find my father dead and our fortune nearly gutted. Everything I've done since then has been about justice. Justice or revenge? Is there a difference? I think you know there is." He moved closer, and Verity forced herself to hold her ground, despite every instinct screaming at her to flee. In the candlelight, his features seemed carved from marble, beautiful and cold, and infinitely sad. "Why do you care?" he asked quietly. "Why does it matter to you what drives me?" "Because you saved my life." The words came from somewhere deep, somewhere true. "Because you've shown me kindness when you had no reason to. Because I look at you, and I see someone in pain. Someone who's been carrying a burden so long, he's forgotten what it feels like to set it down. You don't know anything about me. Then tell me." The challenge hung between them, sharp and electric. For a long moment, neither moved. Then Hadrian turned away, walking to the window where moonlight silvered his profile. "My father was the best man I ever knew," he said, his voice rough. He believed in fairness, in partnership, in the idea that business could be conducted with honor. He trusted Geoffrey Lydgate like a brother, and Geoffrey's son betrayed that trust, stole from us, destroyed everything my father had built. His hands clenched at his sides. I was in Scotland when he died. I didn't even get to say goodbye. Verity's eyes burned. She knew a different version of this story, knew that her brother had been innocent, and knew that the real betrayer was someone else entirely. But she couldn't say that. Not yet. Not without proof. "So you dedicated your life to making them pay," she said instead. "Wouldn't you? If someone destroyed everyone you loved?" Yes, she thought. I would. I am. "What happens when the revenge is complete?" she asked. "When the Lydgates have nothing left to take? What then?" He turned, and in his eyes, she saw something she hadn't expected. Uncertainty. Exhaustion. Let myself think that far ahead. Maybe let myself think that far ahead. Maybe it's time you started. The words came out gentler than she intended, and his expression wavered almost imperceptibly. He crossed the room slowly, stopping just inches away, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, smell the cedar and wood smoke that seemed embedded in his skin. "Who are you, Verity Marsden?" His voice was barely a whisper. "Why do I feel like I've known you forever, and not at all?" "Maybe because you have," she breathed. She didn't mean to say it. It slipped out like a secret escaping, and she saw his eyes widen, saw the question forming on his lips. But before he could speak, before she could take it back or explain it away, a crash echoed from somewhere deep in the house. Voices shouted, footsteps pounded in the corridor. Hadrian pulled back, his expression shifting from vulnerable to alert in an instant. "Stay here." He was gone before she could respond, striding toward the commotion with the authority of a man accustomed to commanding chaos. Verity sagged against the desk, her heart racing, her mind spinning. She'd almost told him. She'd almost revealed everything. And worst of all, part of her had wanted to. She was falling for him. The man who had destroyed her family, the man who believed her brother a thief, the man who would hate her the moment he learned the truth. She was falling, and she had no idea how to stop. The shouts continued in the distance. Verity straightened, composed herself, and followed the sound of disaster. Whatever was happening, it couldn't be worse than what she'd almost done. Could it? The commotion turned out to be nothing catastrophic, merely a kitchen fire quickly contained. But it set the tone for a house party that began in chaos and only grew more complicated from there. 20 guests descended upon Ashworth Manor over the following 2 days, filling its corridors with chatter and its drawing rooms with intrigue. Lords and ladies, merchants and their ambitious wives, young women with hopeful eyes, and young men with calculating ones. They came for business, for pleasure, for the chance to orbit the Duke of Ashworth's powerful sphere. And every single one of them noticed Verity. "Who is she?" became the whispered question that followed her through every room. Cressida introduced her as a dear friend, a companion for the season, but the explanation satisfied no one. They watched her with the focused attention of hawks, searching for weaknesses, for scandal, for anything that might explain why the notorious Duke had installed an unknown woman in his home. Lady Marguerite Ashford was the worst of them. She arrived on the second day with her mother, the Countess of Whitmore, and made her intentions clear within the first hour. Tall, blonde, and beautiful in the cold way of marble statues, she moved through the gathering with the confidence of someone who had already been promised everything she wanted. "The Duke and I have an understanding," she told anyone who would listen, her voice carrying just far enough to ensure Verity heard. "Our families have been discussing an alliance for months. This house party is merely a formality before the official announcement." Cressida made a rude noise when she heard this. "Marguerite has been throwing herself at Hadrian since we were children. The only understanding between them is her understanding that she wants his title, and his understanding that he'd rather marry a hedgehog." But Verity noticed how Hadrian treated Lady Marguerite with careful courtesy, how he danced with her at the first evening's entertainment, how his grandmother watched the pair with obvious approval. Whatever his personal feelings, the alliance made strategic sense. The Ashfords were wealthy, connected, and politically powerful. A marriage between their families would cement Hadrian's position in ways that mere money could not. It shouldn't have bothered her. She was nobody. A woman with a false name and borrowed dresses, playing a role that would end the moment her deception was discovered. But it did bother her. It bothered her terribly. The third evening brought a ball, smaller than the grand affairs of London, but elegant nonetheless. The Manor's ballroom blazed with candles, the orchestra played waltzes and quadrilles, and Verity stood against the wall, watching Hadrian dance with Lady Marguerite, and tried to remember why she was really here. Revenge. Justice. The truth about what happened 8 years ago. Not the way his eyes found hers across crowded rooms. Not the way her heart stuttered when he smiled. Not the way his hand had felt in hers during their single obligatory dance earlier in the evening. "You're staring." Verity turned to find Cressida beside her, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. "I'm observing," Verity said, accepting one of the glasses. "Is there a difference?" "Your brother asked me the same thing once." Cressida's eyebrows rose. "Did he? How interesting." She sipped her champagne, watching the dancers. "Marguerite is beautiful, isn't she? In that cold, perfect way that makes you want to check if she's actually human. She seems well suited to the role of Duchess. She seems well suited to the role of statue. Can you imagine her running this household? Managing the servants, hosting guests, bringing any warmth at all to these endless stone corridors?" Cressida shuddered. Hadrian would be miserable within a month. Perhaps misery is what he expects from marriage. Perhaps. But it's not what he deserves. Cressida turned to face her fully. He deserves someone who challenges him. Someone who makes him feel something beyond duty and obligation. Someone who sees the man beneath the title and likes him anyway. The implication was clear. Verity felt heat rise to her cheeks. Cressida, I've seen how he looks at you. The younger woman's voice dropped to an urgent whisper. I've seen how you look at him. Whatever you're hiding, whatever brought you here, I don't care. You make him human again, Verity. That's worth more than any strategic alliance. Before Verity could respond, the music ended. Hadrian escorted Lady Marguerite from the floor, but his eyes found Verity immediately, as if drawn by some invisible force. Miss Marsden. He approached with Lady Marguerite still on his arm, her smile sharp as glass. I don't believe you've been properly introduced to Lady Marguerite Ashford. We've met, Lady Marguerite said coolly, though I confess I'm still unclear on exactly who Miss Marsden is. Your family has been rather vague on the subject. Miss Marsden is my companion, Cressida interjected, and my friend. How charming. And where did you say your family was from, Miss Marsden? The question was a trap, and everyone present knew it. Lady Marguerite had been investigating, asking questions, digging for information. Verity could see it in her triumphant smile. The North, Verity said calmly. A small village you've likely never heard of. Try me. I'm quite well traveled. Marguerite, Hadrian's voice carried a warning edge. This is neither the time nor the place for interrogations. I'm simply making conversation, Your Grace. Isn't that what house parties are for? Lady Marguerite's smile didn't waver. Although I must say, it's curious how little anyone seems to know about your mysterious guest. No family connections anyone can verify. No social history anyone can trace. It's almost as if Miss Marsden appeared from nowhere. Or from a storm, Verity said quietly. Which is exactly what happened. How romantic. The word dripped with disdain. And how convenient. The tension in their small circle had drawn attention. Other guests were watching now, sensing blood in the water. When Verity felt her composure beginning to crack, felt the weight of her lies pressing down like stones. That's enough. Hadrian's voice cut through the whispers like a blade. Miss Marsden is a guest in my home, and I won't have her subjected to inquisition. If you have concerns about her presence, Lady Marguerite, I suggest you take them up with me, privately, rather than creating a spectacle. Lady Marguerite's face flushed with anger, but she curtsied with poisonous grace. Of course, Your Grace. Forgive me. She turned and swept away, her mother trailing behind with a thunderous expression. Silence fell over their group. Cressida looked delighted. Hadrian looked furious. And Verity felt something crack open in her chest, something that felt dangerously like hope. I apologize, Hadrian said stiffly. That was inappropriate. You didn't have to defend me. Yes. His eyes met hers, and in them she saw something that stole her breath. I did. He disappeared into the crowd before she could reply, but Verity stood rooted to the spot, her pulse racing and her mind spinning. He had defended her, publicly, dramatically, at the cost of offending a potential bride and her powerful family. Why? The answer terrified her almost as much as it thrilled her. Later that night, unable to sleep, Verity walked the moonlit gardens and tried to sort through her tangled emotions. The air was cool and sweet with the scent of roses, and for a moment, she could almost forget the web of lies that surrounded her. You shouldn't be out here alone. She turned. Hadrian stood on the terrace above her, still in his evening clothes, a glass of whiskey in one hand. Neither should you. I live here. It's allowed. He descended the steps slowly, coming to stand beside her among the rose bushes. You handled Marguerite well tonight. I had help. She'll be worse now. You've made an enemy. I seem to have a talent for that, he laughed, a rough sound that seemed to surprise even him. Yes, you do. They stood in silence, listening to the fountain splash in the darkness, feeling the weight of everything unsaid between them. I need to tell you something, Verity said suddenly, the words escaping before she could stop them. Hadrian turned to face her. What? Tell him. Tell him now, before it's too late. Before you fall any deeper. Before the truth destroys you both. But when she opened her mouth, different words came out. Thank you. For tonight. For everything. His expression softened. He reached out, his fingers brushing a strand of hair from her face with devastating gentleness. You're welcome, he said quietly. Though I suspect I should be thanking you. For what? For making me remember what it feels like to care about something beyond revenge. The confession hung between them, fragile and precious. Verity felt tears prick her eyes. Hadrian, don't. He stepped back, the mask sliding back into place. Don't say anything. Not yet. Not until we both know what we want this to be. He left her standing among the roses, her heart breaking with secrets she couldn't speak, and feelings she couldn't contain. Tomorrow she would find a way to tell him the truth. Tomorrow everything would change. But tonight, she let herself imagine, just for a moment, what it might be like if this could be real. Tomorrow came wrapped in disaster. Verity woke to shouting in the corridor and emerged from her chamber to find the household in chaos. Servants rushed past with ashen faces. The dowager stood at the top of the stairs, her expression like carved ice. Grandmother. She's discovered something. Grandmother. She's discovered something. Cressida's face was pale. About you. The world tilted. What? I don't know the details. But she's locked in the study with Hadrian now, and the things she's saying. Cressida broke off, her eyes filling with tears. Verity, whatever you're hiding, you need to tell him yourself, before she poisons him against you completely. Verity's legs moved without conscious direction, carrying her through the corridors toward the study. She heard voices before she reached the door, raised and angry, the dowager's sharp accusations cutting through Hadrian's lower rumble. Lydgate! Her name is Verity Lydgate, and you've been sheltering her under your own roof. Ice flooded Verity's veins. She should run. She should flee while she still could, disappear into the countryside and never look back. Instead, she pushed open the door. They both turned. The dowager's face contorted with triumph and hatred. Hadrian's was a void, empty and terrible, every trace of warmth stripped away. So it's true, he said, his voice flat. You're Geoffrey Lydgate's daughter. Verity lifted her chin. Yes. Everything you told me was a lie. Your name, your family, your reasons for being here. Not everything. Her voice shook despite her best efforts. Not the things that mattered. The things that mattered? The dowager laughed, a sharp sound like breaking glass. You're the daughter of the man who destroyed this family, the sister of the thief who killed our son. Nothing you say matters. Marcus didn't steal anything. The words burst out, years of suppressed truth finally breaking free. He discovered the embezzlement. Yes, but he wasn't responsible. He tried to warn your son, tried to show him evidence that someone else was behind it. But your son died before he could listen, and you chose to believe the convenient lie rather than investigate the truth. Silence fell like a hammer. How dare you? The dowager's voice trembled with rage. How dare you come into this house and speak such filth? It's not filth, it's the truth. Verity turned to Hadrian, pleading. The partnership's accountant, a man named Silas Crawford, he was the real embezzler. Marcus discovered his scheme and gathered evidence, but Crawford learned he was being investigated. He planted false records implicating Marcus, then disappeared before anyone could question him. Convenient. Hadrian's voice cut like frozen steel. A mysterious villain, vanished without a trace. Evidence that no one else has ever seen. The evidence exists. It was in your father's study the night he died. Marcus told me he left copies there, proof of everything. But after your father's death, no one listened to him. You certainly didn't. Because your brother is a liar and a thief, just like his father. My father was your father's best friend. Verity's control finally shattered. They built that company together. They trusted each other with everything. Do you really think my father would have thrown away 30 years of friendship for money? Do you think Marcus would have destroyed his own future, his family's reputation, everything he'd worked for, just to steal from partners he loved? People do terrible things for money. Some people do. My family didn't. Tears streamed down her face now, but she didn't care. I came here to find proof. I came here to clear my brother's name and show you the truth about what happened. I never meant to. I didn't expect to. To what? Hadrian stepped closer, his face terrible in its blankness. To make me care about you? To make me defend you publicly against my grandmother's chosen bride? To make me stand in the moonlight confessing that you'd reminded me how to feel? Each word was a dagger. That was real, Verity whispered. Whatever else was, lies that was real. How would I know the difference? He turned away, his shoulders rigid as stone. Get out. Hadrian, get out of my house, now, before I have you thrown out. The dowager smiled, a vicious expression of vindication. You heard him. Leave. And know that whatever destruction my grandson hasn't yet brought upon your family, he will complete now. This mercy you received ends today. Verity looked at Hadrian's back, at the man she'd come to love despite every reason not to, and felt her heart crack along fault lines she hadn't known existed. The evidence is real, she said quietly. Somewhere in this house, there are documents that prove my brother's innocence. I hope one day you'll look for them. I hope one day you'll see the truth. She left without waiting for a response, walking through the corridor she'd come to know, past the servants who wouldn't meet her eyes, out the front door into morning light that seemed too bright for the darkness inside her. No carriage was offered. No money. Nothing but the clothes on her back, which were technically still borrowed, and the Byron volume still hidden in her chamber, which she'd never have a chance to retrieve. She started walking. Behind her, Ashworth Manor grew smaller and smaller, until it was just a shape on the horizon, then a memory, then a wound that would never fully heal. Hadrian didn't move for a long time after Verity left. He stood at the window of his study, watching her figure grow smaller on the long drive, feeling nothing. He'd become very good at feeling nothing over the past 8 years. It was a survival skill, a way of enduring the endless weight of grief and rage without being crushed beneath it. You did the right thing, his grandmother said from somewhere behind him. She was a viper in our midst. God knows what damage she might have done if I hadn't uncovered her true identity. How did you discover it? A letter arrived this morning from her cousin, the real Mrs. Holloway. She'd been trying to reach Miss Lydgate for weeks, apparently. When her inquiries reached us, everything became clear. Lydgate. The name still burned like acid. She claimed there was evidence, Hadrian said slowly. Documents proving her brother's innocence. Lies. Desperate lies from a desperate woman. Perhaps, he turned from the window. Or perhaps not. I think I'll look anyway. His grandmother's face contorted. Hadrian, don't be foolish. There's nothing to find. The Lydgates destroyed our family. And now they're trying to manipulate you with false promises of, I said I'll look. The steel in his voice silenced her. She stared at him for a long moment, something flickering in her eyes that he couldn't identify. Do as you wish, she said finally, but you won't find anything. She left, and Hadrian was alone with the chaos of his thoughts. He shouldn't look. He should accept the narrative he'd believed for 8 years, continue his campaign of destruction, and forget that Verity Lydgate had ever existed. But he kept hearing her voice, seeing her face, remembering the conviction in her eyes when she'd spoken of evidence and truth. She'd lied about everything else. Why not this? Because it didn't fit. Nothing about Verity fit the image he'd constructed of the Lydgates. She wasn't greedy or scheming. She hadn't tried to seduce him for his money. She'd asked for almost nothing except a chance to survive. And last night in the garden, when she'd started to tell him something she couldn't quite bring herself to say. He moved to his father's old desk, the one piece of furniture he'd never been able to bring himself to use. It sat in the corner of the study, preserved exactly as his father had left it, a shrine to a man he'd loved and lost. The drawers were locked. Hadrian found the key in its hiding place behind a false panel, where his father had always kept it, and began to search. Letters, account books, personal journals. He rifled through years of correspondence, years of business dealings, years of a life cut short. And then, tucked into a hidden compartment at the back of the bottom drawer, he found it. A leather portfolio, sealed with wax, addressed in his father's handwriting. In the event of my death. Hadrian's hands trembled as he broke the seal. Inside were documents, dozens of them. Account ledgers showing discrepancies. Correspondence between Silas Crawford and an unnamed investor. Transfer records moving money to hidden accounts. And a letter from his father, dated 3 days before his death. My dear son, if you're reading this, then I've failed to resolve this matter in time. I've discovered a terrible betrayal, but not from the quarter I first suspected. Marcus Lydgate came to me yesterday with evidence of embezzlement. I was prepared to dismiss him, to believe what Silas Crawford had been whispering for months, that Marcus was the thief. But the evidence he showed me was damning. Crawford has been stealing from us for years. He's been methodical about it, moving small amounts at first, then larger ones as his confidence grew. He's planted false records implicating Marcus, intending to use him as a scapegoat when the theft was eventually discovered. I confronted Crawford this morning. He fled before I could have him arrested. The stress of this discovery has affected my heart badly, and I fear I may not survive long enough to clear Marcus's name publicly. If I die, the narrative will favor Crawford's lies. Marcus will be blamed. The Lydgates will be destroyed. Please, my son, if you find this letter, investigate before you act. Don't let my failure become your lifelong mistake. The truth is here, in these documents. The truth is not what it seems. Your loving father. The letter fell from Hadrian's numb fingers. 8 years. 8 years of hatred. 8 years of systematic destruction. 8 years of hunting down every member of the Lydgate family and stripping them of everything they had. And all of it based on a lie. Marcus Lydgate was innocent. Geoffrey Lydgate was innocent. Verity was innocent. And he had just thrown her out into the world with nothing. Hadrian was moving before he'd consciously decided, running through the corridors and shouting for his horse. He had to find her. He had to. He didn't know what. But he had to try. The dowager appeared at the top of the stairs, her face pale. Hadrian. What? You knew. He stopped, staring up at her. You found this letter. Years ago. And you hid it. Her silence was confirmation enough. Why? Because Geoffrey Lydgate was responsible, she said, her voice shaking. Maybe not for the embezzlement, but for introducing Crawford to your father, for vouching for him, for bringing the viper into our midst. His family deserved to pay for that. They were innocent. No one is innocent. The words erupted from her like a long, suppressed scream. Your father is dead. My son is dead. Someone had to pay for that. I couldn't let his death mean nothing. Hadrian stared at the woman who had raised him, who had shaped his grief into a weapon, who had poisoned his heart with a hatred built on lies. It meant something, he said quietly. It meant I became a monster. Congratulations, grandmother. That's your legacy now. He left her standing on the stairs and rode out into the morning, praying he wasn't already too late. Verity walked until her feet bled. She had no destination, no plan, and no hope. She simply put one foot in front of the other, moving through the Yorkshire countryside like a ghost, trying to outrun the pain that followed her like a shadow. She'd failed. Failed to clear her brother's name. Failed to find the evidence that might have proven their innocence. Failed, most devastatingly of all, to protect her heart from a man she should have hated. The worst part was that she didn't hate him. Even now, even after he'd looked at her with such cold fury and thrown her out like rubbish, she couldn't hate him. She understood him too well. She'd seen the boy beneath the armor, the grieving son, the wounded heart. She knew that his cruelty came from pain, not malice. It didn't make it hurt less, but it made hatred impossible. By evening, she'd reached a small village she didn't recognize. Her borrowed dress was ruined. Her hair had come loose from its pins, and she looked exactly like what she was. A woman with nowhere to go and no one to turn to. The innkeeper took pity on her, offering a room in exchange for work in the kitchen. Verity accepted, too exhausted to feel grateful, and collapsed onto a narrow bed that felt like paradise compared to the endless road. She slept for 14 hours and woke to a world that looked exactly the same, gray and hopeless. 3 days passed in a blur of menial work and silent suffering. She scrubbed dishes. She swept floors. She served meals to travelers who looked through her like she was furniture. And every night, she lay awake in her tiny room and wondered how everything had gone so wrong. On the 4th morning, a carriage arrived at the inn, far too fine for such a modest establishment. Verity was carrying water from the well when it pulled into the yard, and she knew, even before the door opened, who would emerge. Cressida practically threw herself from the carriage. Verity. Oh, thank God. We've been searching everywhere. We. Verity's heart stuttered. Cressida, what are you doing here? Bringing you home, obviously. Cressida grabbed her hands, her eyes brimming with tears. Everything's changed. Hadrian found the evidence. He found your father's letter. He knows the truth about everything. About Crawford. About your brother. About grandmother's lies. The world spun. Verity gripped Cressida's hands to keep from falling. What? Come back with me, please. He's been half mad since you left, searching every village between here and London. I'm not even supposed to be in this direction, but I had a feeling, and she broke off, laughing through her tears. I was right. I found you. I can't go back. Why not? Because it's too late, Verity's voice cracked. Because even if he knows the truth now, I still lied to him. I still deceived him for weeks. How could he ever trust me after that? You could let him decide that for himself. The voice came from behind her. Verity turned. Hadrian stood at the edge of the yard, dust-covered and exhausted, looking like he hadn't slept in days. His horse was lathered, his clothes were disheveled, and his eyes were burning with something that looked like desperate hope. I found Cressida's note, he said hoarsely. I followed her here. I've been following you since you left, trying to find you, trying to... He broke off, running a hand through his hair. I don't know what I'm trying to do. Apologize, maybe. Beg, probably. Tell you that everything I believed was wrong, and I've spent 8 years destroying innocent people, and the woman I love was one of them. The woman I love. Verity's breath caught. You don't love me, she whispered. You don't even know me. I know you're brave and kind and clever. I know you came into the lion's den to save your family's honor. I know you had every reason to hate me, and instead, you made me feel alive for the first time in years. He stepped closer. I know I was falling in love with you before I knew your name, and finding out the truth didn't change that. It just made me realize how much I'd almost lost. Hadrian, I found my father's letter. I found the evidence your brother gathered. Crawford was the thief. Your family was innocent. And my grandmother, his voice broke. My grandmother knew. She hid the truth because she needed someone to blame. I've been her weapon for 8 years, and I never questioned it. You couldn't have known. I should have looked. I should have investigated instead of assuming. I should have been the man my father raised me to be, instead of the monster grief made me. He reached for her hands, and she let him take them. I'm so sorry. For everything. For what I did to your family. For what I did to you. For throwing you out when you were trying to save me from my own blindness. Tears spilled down Verity's cheeks. The things I said, the lies I told, were necessary. You came to find justice, and you found something neither of us expected. His grip tightened. Come home with me. Not to Ashworth Manor, not yet. Home to your family. Let me restore what I destroyed. Let me spend the rest of my life making amends. And us? The question slipped out before she could stop it. What about us? Hadrian lifted her hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles with devastating tenderness. That's your choice, he said quietly. I won't ask for more than you're willing to give. But if you'll let me, I'd like the chance to earn your trust, to court you properly, without lies between us, to see if what we started in the storm can survive in the sunlight. Verity looked into his eyes, pale gray like winter skies, and saw everything she'd never dared to hope for. Yes, she breathed, yes to all of it. He kissed her then, soft and sweet, a promise of things to come. Behind them, Cressida cheered loud enough to startle the horses. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. There was still so much to repair, so many wounds to heal, so many bridges to rebuild. But standing in the dusty yard of a country inn, held in the arms of a man who had traveled through darkness to find her, Verity finally believed that happy endings were possible, even for girls like her. The next weeks were a whirlwind of revelation and restoration. Hadrian published announcements in every major newspaper, declaring the Lydgate family's innocence and his own culpability in their destruction. He hired investigators to track down Silas Crawford, who was eventually found living under a false name in Belgium, and had him extradited to face justice. He restored the Lydgate family's financial holdings, their social standing, their place in the world they'd been driven from. And he faced his grandmother. The confrontation was private, but Verity heard about it afterward from Cressida, who had pressed her ear to the study door without shame. He told her she had two choices, Cressida reported, her eyes wide. Accept Verity completely and publicly, or leave Ashworth Manor forever. He said he was done letting her poison control his life. What did she choose? She cried. I've never seen grandmother cry before. She said she was sorry, that grief had made her cruel, that she'd convinced herself the ends justified the means. She begged him to forgive her. Did he? Cressida's expression softened. He said forgiveness would take time. But he wouldn't exile her. He said he'd already lost enough family to hatred, and he wasn't going to lose more. The Dowager's public apology came a week later, delivered at a gathering she'd arranged specifically for that purpose. She stood before 50 of society's most influential figures and admitted her role in perpetuating a false narrative, her concealment of evidence, her complicity in the destruction of innocent people. It was humiliating, was necessary, was. Want you to know that I see now what want you to know, that I see now what my grandson sees. You're extraordinary, Miss Lydgate, and if you'll allow it, I'd like the chance to know the real you. Verity considered the woman who had been her enemy, who had nearly destroyed her, who had spent 8 years nurturing hatred instead of seeking truth. I'd like that, she said. In time. It wasn't absolution, but it was a beginning. As for Verity's own family, the reunion was everything she'd imagined, and more. Her brother Marcus wept openly when Hadrian presented him with the evidence of his innocence. Her father, frail but fierce, shook Hadrian's hand with dignity and grace. Her mother embraced Verity for so long that everyone else pretended not to notice their tears. You saved us, Marcus said, his voice rough with emotion. You did what I couldn't. You found the truth." "I had help," Verity said, looking at Hadrian. He stood slightly apart, uncertain of his welcome in a family he'd spent years destroying. But Marcus crossed to him with purposeful steps and extended his hand. "We should have been enemies," Marcus said. "By rights, I should hate you for everything you did. But my sister loves you, and she's the best judge of character I know. If she believes in you, so do I." Hadrian shook his hand, and something in his expression finally relaxed. "I'll spend the rest of my life proving worthy of that trust." "See that you do." The house party at Ashworth Manor that autumn was very different from the one that had nearly destroyed everything. The same guests returned, now buzzing with the scandal of the Duke's dramatic reversal, and his equally dramatic courtship of the woman he'd once tried to ruin. Lady Marguerite Ashford did not attend. "She's engaged to Lord Pemberton now," Cressida reported with satisfaction. "A perfect match. They're both insufferable." Verity laughed, something she did often now. The weight she'd carried for so long had finally lifted, replaced by a lightness that sometimes made her dizzy. She was standing on the terrace, watching the sunset paint the Yorkshire moors in shades of gold and rose, when Hadrian found her. "You look happy," he observed, coming to stand beside her. "I am happy. It still surprises me." "Why?" "Because I spent so long expecting the worst, preparing for disaster. I'm not sure I know how to live without that weight." He turned to face her, his expression serious. "Then let me help you learn. Let me spend every day showing you that good things can last, that trust can be rebuilt, that love doesn't have to end in tragedy. Is that a proposal?" "It could be." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "If you'll have me." Verity's breath caught. "Hadrian, I know it's soon. I know we've barely begun to build something real between us. But I've wasted 8 years on hatred, and I don't want to waste another moment on hesitation." He opened the box to reveal a ring, simple and elegant, with a pale green stone that matched her eyes. "Verity Lydgate, you came into my life like a storm and taught me how to feel again. Will you marry me?" Tears blurred her vision. She looked at this man who had been her enemy, her host, her reluctant ally, and finally her love. She thought of everything they'd survived to reach this moment. "Yes," she whispered. 1,000 times. "Yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, his hands trembling slightly. Then he kissed her, soft at first, then deeper, a promise sealed with passion. From somewhere inside the manor, Cressida's delighted shriek echoed across the grounds. The dowager's slower, more dignified applause followed. Verity laughed against Hadrian's lips. "We have an audience. Let them watch. I want the whole world to know." He kissed her again, and Verity let herself believe, finally and completely, that this was real. The wedding took place in spring, when the Yorkshire moors burst into bloom and the gardens of Ashworth Manor overflowed with roses. Verity wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her frame, and updated with delicate lace that Cressida had chosen. He looked at her like she was the answer. He looked at her like she was the answer to a question he'd been asking his whole life. When she reached him, he took her hands with the same tenderness he'd shown that first night, carrying her through the storm. "I vowed to destroy you once," he murmured, low enough that only she could hear. "Now I vow to protect you, cherish you, love you until my last breath." "And I vow to keep you honest," she whispered back, "to challenge you when you need it, to remind you that the man beneath the title is the one I fell in love with." They exchanged rings. They spoke the words that bound them together. And when the vicar pronounced them husband and wife, Hadrian kissed her with such passion that several elderly aunts had to fan themselves vigorously. The reception was a celebration unlike anything Ashworth Manor had seen in decades. The dowager presided over the festivities with something approaching warmth, having softened considerably in the months since her confession. Cressida danced with every eligible gentleman present and declared them all boring. Marcus made a toast that had everyone in tears. And as the evening wore on, Hadrian drew Verity away from the crowds, leading her through the familiar corridors to the library, where so much had changed between them. "I have something for you," he said, pressing a wrapped package into her hands. Verity opened it to find a book, leather-bound and beautiful. Not just any book, she realized as she read the spine. A first edition of Wuthering Heights, set on these very moors. "I thought it fitting," Hadrian said. "A story of love and vengeance and redemption, written about a place like this. It's perfect." She traced the gilt lettering with trembling fingers. "Thank you. There's something else. Inside." She opened the cover and found a letter pressed between the first pages. The handwriting was familiar, though she'd only seen it once before, her father-in-law's handwriting. "I found it with the other documents," Hadrian explained. "It's addressed to both of us. I thought we should read it together. My dearest son and daughter, if you're reading this together, then you found each other despite everything that tried to keep you apart. The truth has come to light. Love has conquered hatred, and I am smiling wherever I am." I knew the Lydgates, though we never spoke of it publicly. Geoffrey was my dearest friend. His wife made the best scones in Yorkshire, and their daughter, a little girl with green eyes who loved to read. I always thought she'd be perfect for you, Hadrian. Fate has strange ways of working. I hope yours has been kind. Be good to each other. Trust each other. Remember that love is always worth the risk. Your loving father, in this life and the next. Verity's tears fell onto the page. Hadrian's arm wrapped around her, pulling her close. "He knew," she whispered. "Somehow, he knew. Maybe he did. Or maybe he just hoped." Hadrian pressed a kiss to her hair. "Either way, he was right. You are perfect for me." They stood there for a long time, holding each other in the library that had seen their first confrontation, their first confession, their first step toward something real. Outside, the celebration continued. Music drifted through the windows. Laughter echoed across the grounds. But in their sanctuary of books and firelight, the Duke of Ashworth and his beloved Duchess were exactly where they belonged. 1 year later. The storm came without warning, as Yorkshire storms often did. Verity watched it from the window of the nursery, one hand resting on her swelling belly, the other holding a cup of tea that had long since gone cold. "You should rest," Hadrian said, appearing in the doorway. "I'm not tired." "You're always tired. You're growing a person." She laughed, the sound still coming easily even after a year of marriage. "Fine. But stay with me." He crossed to her side, wrapping his arms around her from behind. Together, they watched the rain lash the windows, listened to the thunder roll across the moors. "Do you remember the night we met?" Verity asked. "I remember carrying a half-drowned stranger through a storm and wondering why I couldn't just leave her on the road like a sensible person." "Because you're not sensible. You're romantic, despite your best efforts to hide it." He laughed against her neck. "Don't tell anyone. I have a reputation to maintain. Your secret's safe with me." The baby kicked, and Hadrian's hand moved to feel it, wonder spreading across his face as it did every time. "What do you think they'll be like?" he asked. "Our child? Stubborn, probably. Dramatic, definitely. With our combined heritage of secrets and schemes, they'll probably be insufferable. I can't wait." Neither could she. A year ago, she'd been an outcast, fighting for survival, certain that happiness was something that happened to other people. Now she was the Duchess of Ashworth, loved beyond measure, about to become a mother. The storm raged on outside, but inside Verity was warm. She was safe. She was home, and this time, she planned to stay. Thank you for being here. You are the reason these stories exist, because you believe in love that chooses courage over convenience, in characters who fight for happiness despite the odds, in endings that feel earned and true. Your presence makes this space warm and welcoming, and I'm grateful for every moment you spend with these characters. Do you have a favorite line or scene? Your engagement helps me understand what moves you, what keeps you listening, and what kinds of stories to create next. Consider subscribing if you'd like more romances with emotional depth and genuine character growth. Thank you for being here. You make this community what it is.